Here's the marker for Fowl Town. I missed it the first time. Had to turn around. Oh boy, it looks rough. Okay, I got my little grave cleaning kit out of my trunk and cleaned it off a little bit. So looks a little better. This is the marker of Fowl Town, and for a historical marker, it's not bad on the information it has. Fowl Town was in this area, actually maybe about 4 or 5 miles away actually from where this marker is on Fayetteville Highway in Georgia. So anyway, this is the beginning of the First Seminole War, what happened here. Amelia has town here, and he was not part of the Treaty of Fort Jackson. So, you know, he figured it didn't apply to him. So General Gaines tells him to come to Fort Scott, you know, and talk things over, and wants him to move his village up, you know, into the Creek Reservation north of Fort Gaines. That's like an hour's drive north of here. And Amelia says, no way, he doesn't trust the Americans. You know, he's not going to do that. And Governor Call, you know, says it was King Haji, who was the chief of that, you know, depending on whose account you read at the time. So Governor Call, in his account, says, you know, the Indians, of course, had good reason not to trust the Americans, because every time they talk with the Americans, they lose more and more land, you know, and they come out the losers of the negotiations. So they say, no, we're not going to come. So General Gaines says to his subordinate Major Twiggs, you know, bring Amelia here to Fort Scott. Force him to come here. Go down to his village, Fowl Town, a few miles away, and bring him here. If he doesn't come here, even take some of his people hostage and force him to come here. So they come down to Fowl Town. The people in the town are surprised to see these soldiers show up. And most of the men on our way are just coming back as the soldiers are arriving. Fighting ensues, shooting back and forth. Maybe about 3 or 4 of the warriors are killed. One of the women is killed, mistaken for warriors. The soldiers go away empty-handed. They find during the altercation in one of the houses a letter from the British saying, what good allies you have been during the last war. So the soldiers come back a couple days later on the 23rd of November 1817 with 300 soldiers this time. They find the village deserted. They bring in some wagons, take all the corn, take the cattle they find wandering around. As they're leaving, the Indians come back. You know, as far as they figure, the Americans are looting their town, burning down the town or something, raiding the town. That's a declaration of war. They attack, drive the soldiers away. One of the soldiers is killed, Pfeiffer Hughes, the first American killed in this action, the opening of the First Seminole War, is the musician. This is the opening action of the First Seminole War. The destruction of Fowl Town. The Americans eventually come back, find the town deserted, the residents have abandoned, they burn it to the ground. You know, this is a shameful action of the beginning of the First Seminole War. This is before Andrew Jackson has shown up. Too late to turn back. Okay, Fort Scott. Hutchinson's Ferry, or Wingate's Lodge Marina on Lake Seminole, about 10 miles from Fowl Town. Established here originally when incident at Negro Fort, Prospect Bluff, was going on in 1816. The Army needed a fort, you know, to, I guess, keep the traffic open on the Apalachicola River. And so Fort Scott was built originally named Camp Crawford, and then it was abandoned as soon as the incident was over. Negro Fort was blown up and calmed down, and then the incident with Neomathil and Fowl Town, the fort was reactivated. And then Neomathil considered a provocation, putting a military fort right next to its town, only 10 miles away, very close, considered a short distance from his town, within walking distance. Told the soldiers to stay on their side of the river, to don't cut any wood, don't cross over, and all that. So, General Gaines, told Neomathil to come over and talk things over. Neomathil didn't want to do that. And so, anyway, go over, we'll tell about that at the Fowltown marker. So, anyway, Fowltown's destroyed, and Fort Scott becomes the main staging area for the invasion into Florida there. But after Fowltown is destroyed, then they're running out of supplies. There's no road coming here to Fort Scott. There's no fence between Spanish Florida and Georgia. It's remote territory. It's very sick. The whole fort's just a hellhole. It's out in the middle of nowhere. So they're getting a resupply ship up the Apalachicola River. The boats are coming from Mobile under the command of Lieutenant Scott. And the boats are coming up the Apalachicola River. They're almost here at the fort, and on the night of November 30th, they know there's been some trouble. They don't know all the details. On the night of November 30th, they're attacked. And that's known as the Scott Massacre, and that's the incident that provokes Andrew Jackson. That's the excuse he needs to come down and invade Spanish Florida in the First Seminole War. And Fort Scott becomes the staging area for that. And that starts the second phase of the Seminole War. So Andrew Jackson arrives here in March of 1818. Fort Scott remains an American outpost until September 1821. In June of 1821, Florida becomes American territory and becomes part of the United States, and Fort Scott is abandoned after that. So anyway, all we have of Fort Scott here is this historical marker and the cannon memorial or monument down at Fort Hughes. So Fort Scott is somewhere in that reservoir. Also buried at Fort Scott are the remains of about 200 soldiers, military burials, forgotten and abandoned. Forgotten and abandoned fort. That was the one of the main military posts from 1818 to 1821. A major conflict in the United States history, now abandoned and forgotten. And about 3 miles from Fort Scott is Camp Recovery, which was the hospital, healthier climate from the sick and swampy area. You have a gate there today, and in the back is the cemetery. There's about 20 or so unmarked graves back there. There's a monument back there too, upturned cannon, a historical marker, and Camp Recovery. Camp Recovery was just active for, I guess, a short period of time, 1820 to 1821. Now, you see the pavement change? That is the state line between Florida and Georgia. And that's the only way you can tell you're on the